As usual, um, since last week, the comments have been fruitful. And jumping into those comments, jumping into those thoughts, it seems as though, first of all, I just want to say that originally the concept for this justification live, it was designed to have in mind the show justification and to be an outlet as to review what aired during the week on the TV program to sort of break down, digest, and harmonize in a more practical sense what is, or what was, or what had been, or what has been said on justification. But since starting this, that that direction has so, I guess, been led by the individuals that do reach out when they hear this particular segment. They're hearing this, and they're hearing the things that are coming out from it. And since that has been like the trend, since that has been the trend, I've just kept that going and keeping up the dialogue with the flow of the comments and the contents from within this segment has been enlightening and has been an experience, most definitely an experience. And every week there is something new to talk about because every week there is a point of view, there is a question, there is a thought, there is a pattern that an individual will bring up to me that they are thinking about. And I find it completely interesting and refreshing. And to touch on these things because these are the thoughts that are coming from individual minds that are going through an experience where they are realizing that what they have previously held to be just is no longer that. They are going just through an experience where the Bible matters and where the Bible should matter, and not in a traditional religious sense, not in a sense of habit, not in a sense of routine, not in a sense of dogma, not in a sense of theory, but in a concrete sense that is playing out for the growth and the development, not just of what is believed, but also the being within. And so I'm saying all of that because the being asked, it seems as though, which is very cool. Every week there are new comments, and I'm asked to dig further into them. Since last week, the idea of the I am, before Abraham was, I am, and in that segment saying that there will be a point in time as I neared the end, the close, that we, our conversation, will be able to be confident enough to say, I am also, and not in the sense of any sort of secular religious theory where the I is all that there is and all that there ever will be. The I is God. That's not what that meant. And I made that clear is I am is a philosophy. Before Abraham was, I am. In right context of language, Abraham is a philosophy. Before Abraham was, I am existed. I am is a philosophy. The main character in the book of John lived by the philosophy called I am. That doesn't mean he walked around saying, I am God, I am this, I am that, even though the author of the book of John will write that in there in wrong context. That's not just to interpret it as that. There's a philosophical basis for why that's written the way that it is. And it all stems back to the philosophy of I am. And as I was, as I have different conversations with individuals that do hear and that do reach out to expound more on what that philosophy is. And the way that I could think about explaining it is when Moses went to liberate the people, Moses said, "Who should I say contacted me? Who am I speaking to on my iPhone?" And the voice on the other end said, "Tell them that I am sent you." Now, we can interpret that the way we would like to. We can read that as the type of story that it is, but this is a story that is philosophically based. The elocution is philosophical. That I am is representing a philosophy, and the philosophy that I am is encompasses the entire scope of what we are to see after that point. And going back weeks, even months or so, bringing up the Exodus as a philosophical illustration of what our personal devotional conversation should be going through. So when we are seeing the Exodus, we are actually seeing the philosophy of I am. And in plain terms, the philosophy of I am, when one is living by that, one is breaking the chains of religious slavery and is entering into a period of pruning and purging for the purpose of sectioning out a particular land for the devotional conversation to occupy, that it may personally encounter and engage with the living mind of the living God that brought it there. That is the philosophy of what is I am. Before Abraham was, and what is Abraham? I should say Abraham. Of course, Abraham is mixed in there with faith, righteousness by faith. But the philosophy of Abraham yet dwells on the fulfillment of religious code, yet by faith, which is an odd sort of thing you got going on there, because there is no faith in religious law. There is no faith in religious law. What does that mean? That means is that it does not take one faith to commit themselves to an act of conscience, to commit an act believing that their conscience will be well through the act. Doesn't take faith to do that, takes faith to believe in it. Doesn't take faith to do that, it takes faith to believe in that. So, looking at the idea of one living by faith through the religious law, it is a concept that really doesn't weigh, which is why living by the religious law by faith is not something that is associated to Abraham, because before Abraham did anything, there was no law ascribed to him. It was simply a move. Abraham moved by the hope of the faith that he had. There was no law attached to that. Yet when you get into the little intricacies of what Abraham represents, you can't get away from the fact of bondage by religious code. Yet before Abraham was, there existed no such. There existed no such. Genesis 1, Genesis 2, Genesis 3, as I said last week, are a perfect witness and testimony uh, to just that fact when you get down to the philosophy that exists therein. And looking at the illustration of the crucifixion, which is a lesson on the philosophy of I am, meaning the philosophy of existing, the devotional conversation existing without the slavery of religious rule. Galatians 3:13, breaking that down perfectly. Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, which in another conversation that I had, having to hear someone say to me, listen, I have been, you know, raised Catholic and going to church and committing myself to the sacraments, and I do them and I have my faith in them and I believe in them. But is it that what you are saying is that this is the definition of sin? This is what I have been redeemed from. This is what I have been redeemed from. And yet I'm doing these acts. So this is a question that was placed onto me due to what I said, and the answer is absolutely. And this isn't coming from me. This is coming from the illustrations within the Bible. This is a this is basic Bible philosophy related to the engaged scope of experience that the mind within the scriptures wants the individual conversation to have, which engaged experience is illustrated through the crucifixion. Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law. There's no, there is no, and there's nothing in that that has to do with a belief on a blood or of a dying and rising demigod, or from Genesis to Malachi, the that's the underlying philosophy. Redemption from religious law. And the illustration of the crucifixion speaks to what the actual man taught, the breakdown of that. And the author, again, of the book of Galatians, doing that perfectly. Christ has redeemed from the curse of the law. If you take Christ or Jesus, whatever you want to say, if you believe what you believe, the ultimate sign of belief should be a withdrawal, should be the conversation's withdrawal from maintaining self, personal and devotional, from religious law. Again, if we are holding what we are seeing to be a true sacrifice, to be a true illustration of something positive for us, it is that the illustration representing redemption, newness, regeneration, refreshing, resurgence from the scope of the philosophy of the religious law. Redemption in plain sense has to do with the devotional conversation. Redemption in plain sense has to do with the devotional conversation. It is the devotional conversation that is to die and that is to rise. It is the devotional conversation that is to die and that is to rise. The conversation is to die to what that illustration represents in death, and is to rise to what that illustration represents in its rising. The crucifixion of that body represents the crucifixion not of a literal body, but of a body of philosophy located into the scope of what is the philosophy of the religious law. When we see that body crucified, that means what that body represents is sin. So if the code of the religious law is what our conversation abides by, Bible is letting us know that our conversation is in a sinful condition. Sin to the Bible is primarily related to the conversation's thoughts, feelings, actions, and behaviors. The illustration of the crucifixion depicts right actions, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors from the conversation, wrong actions, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors from the conversation. Wrong actions, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors from the conversation, they belong to what is crucified. The illustration of the crucifixion is an illustration representing one's separation from the code of religious law. That means one's separation from handling oneself by religious theory, by religious rite, by religious dogma, by religious routine, by religious habit, by religious holy holiday, by religious theory, and everything else along with that, by religious ceremony, ritual, whatever you want to add on to that. It is all passed away. It is to be dead to our conversation. Our conversation is to die in that sense. Why and how? Because our conversation is conceived within the religious world. The religious world maintains itself by everything that should be crucified. When your conversation is suffering its wound, its crucifixion, it's going to feel wrong, it's going to hurt, it's going to be disastrous, it's going to be very traumatic and very dramatic, because it is separating, it is suffering a wound to what it has been born to. Everything our conversation has naturally been born to is false. That's what the illustration of the crucifixion represents. Death to what is false. Every conversation is conceived within the religious world. Every conversation, to some degree, whether low, medium, or high, believes on theories and on the routine of the religious world. And the theory and the routine of the religious world, it revolves around religious law. If you're believing in Christ, if you're believing in Jesus, and you're really sincere about it, this is very plain and it is written very clear. Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law. How? Why? Cursed is everyone that is hanged on a tree. So when we're taking this and making sense of it, as the individual was that reached out and said, I've been offering these sacrifices, I've been doing all of this in my religion, does that mean that I have been committing sin? Breaking this down, it was a bit of a pause on their part, because then you really get this to see how Bible thinks. And then you get to question how you yourself have been thinking this entire time, because it's saying one thing here on these pages, yet it's saying another thing in the religious world. And the religious world is maintaining what these pages say not to maintain. And it gets very interesting. And what I have here in the chat is some verses. And the idea of this portrayed through Galatians 6, and I have here just lightly quoted verse 14. Galatians 6:14, God forbid that I should glory save in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, by whom the world is crucified unto me, and I unto the world. So when we are accepting the illustration of this crucifixion, world is crucified. But what is world? I've gone over this plenty of times here and also on justification, but just for reference, I have this quote, John 18:20, I spake openly to the world, I ever taught in the synagogue, whither the Jews always resort. In Bible language, world is not natural, biological, ecological world. World in Bible language is the world where the Jews resort. World in Bible language is synagogue. World in Bible language is religious world. When one accepts redemption, one is actually accepting a separation and a withdrawal from the religious world. Again, because as I said last week, and I do say plenty of times, because religion is secular, the things of religion will make the individual adhering to whatever it is saying believe a secular context. So when you're hearing world, the world is crucified unto me, you're thinking secular world. To the Bible's mind, that's not where it's aimed at. Secular world is what it will be. That's not where the Bible is located. Bible is located within the world of religion to correct, to advise minds therein. And when we're seeing that illustration of the crucifixion, as I had to say to the individual that questioned, am I sinning? Am I not redeemed because I'm doing these things? Yet, Bible says that that's wrong to do, but my religion says it's right to do. Bringing all of this out to show the definition of certain things, because the aim of the scope of the devotional conversation is one toward an experience where wisdom is fulfilling the environment within. So if we are really accepting and if we are really understanding what it means to go through this experience of redemption, it has nothing to do with believing on someone's blood or, again, as I said, on a demigod or anything like this. The idea is law, and it's a fundamental experience that goes back past Moses, past Abraham, past everyone, to the beginning where the idea of exodus from religious slavery into a land especially for the individual conversation is fixed and settled for the purpose of communing with the mind and the words that brought them there. I covered this in justification, so it's really cool to sort of bring all of that together. Covered this here months ago and weeks ago. The experience that is to be solitary, the devotional conversation that is called to be alone, to go through this experience for the purpose of maintaining what that illustration of the crucifixion represents, which is understanding and accepting the type of redemption that is being offered through the scriptures. Accepting and understanding the type of redemption that is being offered through the scriptures and through the mind therein. And that is something that we may not agree with. As I always say, this experience that the Bible's mind is offering, it is not for everyone. It is for the individual conversation, and it is for the individual human being that recognizes that something is wrong within and also without, and needs and understands the need to make that change. When faithfully honoring that illustration of the crucifixion, one is crucified to the world. That is plain. And the world being the world of whither the Jews resort, the religious world. That means where the Jews are, as it says in the book of Romans, they hold to be teachers of the knowledge of the truth that is within the law. The conversation, although created and although formed within the religious world, and adopting the concept therein, the blueprint of the religious world, which is righteousness, piety, favor, and an experience of divine right through religious law. The conversation is supposed to die to that. That's what the illustration of the crucifixion represents. When that body hanged is crucified, it is not a literal body, it should not be thought of. It is a body of philosophy pointing to law, religious law. That's what that body represents. It's crucified. And what is nailed to that tree is that philosophy. What is fallen down and risen from that tree is a conversation without religious law, meaning liberty. When not found with religious law, you are found with mind. Mind and the ability to make decision. Mind and the ability to make decision for the opportunity to gain wisdom to live by. These are the Proverbs. These are the Psalms. This is Genesis 1, 2, and 3. The individual conversation is to pass through a solitary experience for wisdom to live by. That the wisdom therein may be the guide. As it says in the Proverbs, guide thine own heart in the way. It is wisdom that is to guide the heart in the particular intended way that the mind within the scriptures would have. And the only way that that can happen is crucifixion from the world. Crucifixion from the world, breaking the chains, not again, natural secular world. This is the religious world, because this is the only world the Bible is concerned with. Breaking those chains. And so the questions from last week, the thoughts from last week, the conversations from last week, leading into this week, and just these quotes here that I felt I needed to just put there and to bring out, because the idea that the Bible has for the devotional conversation is liberty, not simply just for liberty, not simply just to be lawless. What is to rule the conversation is the law of wisdom, not law as in religious law as in standard or principle. The principle philosophy of wisdom is to rule the direction of the conversation, and that in turn is to affect the scope of the human being and the being of the human's growth and development. That's the process. And the illustration of the crucifixion being a perfect point for that, because once we can see that element and understand where the author of the book of Galatians is going, because as I said last week, to take that illustration literal, it does nothing. The one crucified is not a literal blessing. The one crucified, their blood is not literally doing anything for anyone. The one crucified is representing something accursed. So if we're going to take that literally, if you're believing on a literal offering for a literal sacrifice from a literal deity, man deity and such, he that is hanged is accursed. You're actually believing on something that is irrelevant to anything real. There is no salvation in such. This individual hanged is actually cursed. So we are actually believing in a curse. We're believing in nothing. But to observe the illustration philosophically, as does the author of the book of Galatians, means to take the conversation to the level that is intended, to the level that the mind within the Bible intended it to be taken to, which is a level that is personal, which is a level that is intimate, which is a level where, after dying to self and to the natural devotional self, rising to the intended mission and to the envisioned vision of what the devotional conversation should be through wisdom. And it is through wisdom, through the gaining and the pruning, purging, through the analysis, through the recycling, through understanding the character of the conversation. It is through this experience that principle is to guide the heart of the personal and the devotional conversation. And that's really what the Bible is getting at. Bible is highlighting through the illustration of the crucifixion what a sinful conversation is and what a sinful conversation is not. When our conversation is found still tied to what is crucified, it is a sinful conversation. When our conversation is found without that, our conversation is embracing the liberty, not simply for personal devotional clarity, but also for personal mental clarity. Personal mental clarity for personal devotional clarity, personal devotional clarity for personal mental clarity. That's the scope of where the Bible really wants the attention of the individual to go to. That's the purpose of the illustration of one hanged from a tree. That's the purpose of the illustration of the Exodus. That's the purpose of the illustration of the garden, is to allow the individual mind, the individual devotional mind, to understand the liberty that it needs, to understand the concept of its growth and development in solitary places, growing familiar with and growing accustomed to being alone, not a member, as we always hear, be in the world and not of the world. Again, that's us. We take that secularly. That's in the Bible's context, not secular. The world that the Bible talks of is the world of religion. And again, that was something that was, it's always interesting when I break these things down to hear individuals' responses when I show that the Bible's underlying scope is a separation from the religious world, because it's really difficult for some reason to separate the Bible from religion. Even though the Bible does not have a religion, nor does it give one. So that's that main line that we can only understand, that and our conversation can only understand as it willingly goes through what it has to go through for the type of clarity that it needs, for not simply just mental, not simply just moral, but also philosophical and also devotional. Devotional in context, for seeping into the human being in time. But I could go on, but I will end it there. And for the week, as usual, we're remembering that creation through whatever we go through, but now in the context of what world is, now in the context of what um, is to be separated from and to be gathered to, taking in all things for the purpose of wisdom and bringing them back to weigh them with what is within the scriptures for a more sure understanding of how to carry ourselves, how to carry our devotional conversations, thoughts, and feelings, and how to simply embrace the growth that is necessary for that therein.